Perfect. Thank you, Jackie, and good morning and greetings from the town of Coronach and RM of Heart Butte, number 11. As Jackie mentioned, my name is Kelsey Umansky, and I'm the Community Development Officer in Coronach, and will be helping host the session today. Thank you all for joining, and especially to SaskPower and the Chamber for partnering with us on bringing you some of this information today, as I know there's been many questions about it in the community. We would like to begin by acknowledging Indigenous people of the lands that we are gathered on virtually this morning. In Coronach and Estevan, we are gathering on Treaties 4 and 2 territory. Treaty 2 is the traditional territory of the Saulteaux, Nakota, Cree, and Dakota. Treaty 4 is the traditional territory of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, and Lakota, and both treaties being the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories and are committed on moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirits of reconciliation and collaboration. I'd also like just to quickly acknowledge that it's Bell's Let's Talk today. So someone or if it's yourself struggling with mental illness, please check out all the resources that will be mentioned and made available today, and please reach out if needed. We also have Tarek Tabik and a couple other representatives from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, the CNSC, with us today. So the CNSC oversees all nuclear activities in Canada, from researching to mining to power generation and much more. Thanks, Tarek, for giving that a hands up there. And he also has some other colleagues, Ryan and Gavin, that are also with us today, that they might be stepping in every once in a while if needed to answer some questions. So we can get right into our speakers here then this morning. So we are going to start by introducing Rochelle Verrett-Morphy. Rochelle is the Vice President of Corporate Affairs at SaskPower. She's also SaskPower's General Counsel. And right now she's the Acting Vice President of Human Resources and Safety. So a very busy lady. She wanted to be here this morning to share some remarks before we get started. So I will send it over to you, Rochelle.
Thanks, Kelsey. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I just want to acknowledge and thank Kelsey and Jackie for helping us organize this session this morning. Good morning, everyone. We really appreciate you sharing some of your time with us today. We're here to provide you with details about the work that we're doing on nuclear power from small modular reactors. You'll also hear them described as just SMRs. So last fall, we started an early engagement program to introduce our SMR project to Indigenous communities and some key stakeholders. Later this morning, you'll hear from our project manager, Darcy Holderness. He'll give you an overview of the project and share some of the technical criteria that we need to consider as we determine where to build an SMR facility if we do proceed with that technology. But before we start discussing nuclear power on other projects that, or other projects that SaskPower is working on, I want to express my thanks on behalf of SaskPower to you as the residents of Coronach, Estevan, and all the surrounding communities. For me personally, my husband was born in Estevan. His dad worked for a SaskPower contractor. Whether you work for SaskPower, a coal mine, a coffee shop in the community, a grocery store, or any other supporting business in one of the communities, or if you're a stay-at-home mom or dad, a teacher, student, a doctor, a gas station attendant, whatever it is that you do, you are directly or indirectly responsible for helping us keep our lights on, warm our houses, and keep our economy humming. Your contributions have helped us at SaskPower build the power system that we have in place today. And you also know better than anyone that SaskPower and the entire energy industry is going through really a period of unprecedented change. Regulations on the use of fossil fuels are much more stringent now than they were even just a few years ago. The Prime Minister has stated that Canada will be a coal-free jurisdiction. The federal government is regulating really the end of mining, burning, and exporting coal. During the Liberal campaign, there was a promise of a clean electricity standard to achieve 100% net zero emitting electricity system by the year 2035. To achieve these aims, they continue to do things like increase the carbon tax and tighten federal regulations. These changes in regulations are really what is driving SaskPower's need to change the way that we provide electricity to the province. We know that these changes impact you, your families, and your communities. And we know that you have questions. I'm just going to say right off the top that we don't have the answers that you're looking for today, but I can tell you what we do know. We know that we have to keep skilled people at our Poplar River power stations in Coronach and Boundary Dam and Shan power stations in Estevan to continue to safely operate these important baseload power plants. We know that these power stations have in many ways anchored your communities for many years. And we are working hard to meet these challenges with appropriate retention and recruitment strategies. Our people have the specialized technical knowledge that we need to run these plants, and in many cases, it takes many years to acquire this knowledge. They understand what it really takes to run the technology that we operate today. And as we add new technology to our company, like perhaps nuclear power from SMRs, we will grow the new and changing skill sets in our workforce. SaskPower has committed to stand with our employees and coal-reliant communities in partnership with the appropriate agencies as we navigate through this transition. We would like to see the federal government create funding programs for securing new jobs, income support, education, skills building. And we're urging leadership at all levels of government to work together in meeting the objectives of a net zero economy. For our province, achieving this net zero economy is going to require a serious look at all available and emerging power supply options. This includes carbon capture and storage, as well as solar, wind, and other renewables. And it does include nuclear power from SMRs as an option. So we've invited our Director of Generation Planning and Asset Management, Doug Opseth, who's here with us today to provide an update on our plans before Darcy shares an overview of our SMR project. But first, I'm happy to take a few questions. If you have any for me, please enter them in the Q&A.
We'll just give it a minute for any questions to come in. All right, in the interest of time, Rochelle, are you able to stay on for a few minutes in case there's a question that comes in?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate you joining us today. I have the privilege of introducing Doug. Doug Opseth is the Director of Generation Planning and Asset Management. He and his team of engineers and specialists are responsible for making sure there's enough electricity available to power the province at all times. Doug's going to provide some context about why SaskPower is looking at nuclear power from SMRs and update us on some of the other options the company is working on. So before I turn it over to Doug, just a reminder, put any questions in the Q&A that you may have for Rochelle or for Doug. And once Doug has wrapped up his presentation, we'll be able to get to those questions. Thank you, and over to you, Doug.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting myself and everybody from SaskPower to be here. It's certainly, as Rochelle pointed out, it's an interesting time in the electricity sector. And when Rochelle says we're going through unprecedented change, she's not understating it. The world and the technologies are changing at an incredibly rapid pace. Travis, are we going to bring up the presentation? I think we have a presentation we're going to bring up. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so as Rochelle noted, we're here to talk primarily about SMRs, and I'll talk a little bit just to kind of kick it off, talk a little bit why are we looking at SMRs now, talk a little bit of some of the supply options we're looking at in the future, and then turn over to Darcy to really run through SMRs. And I'll plan to stay here for the entire session to answer any questions you might have. And then, hopefully, as we move through COVID, we'll be able to come down in person and do more of these sessions in person. So one of the questions we get asked a lot is why nuclear power and why now? And I'll say there's a lot of technology. It's not unique to nuclear power. There's a lot of things that we've looked at in the past that maybe weren't the right fit for SaskPower at the time, but we are taking and re-looking at them. Certainly with regards to nuclear power, it's something that SaskPower has been interested in for a long time. You know, Saskatchewan has a long history with uranium mining and nuclear power here and various aspects of the industry here in Saskatchewan. And, you know, I know when I first came to SaskPower, 15 years ago, it was around that time or shortly thereafter that, we did a really deep look at the potential for nuclear power here in Saskatchewan. And some of you might remember Bruce Power being out here in Saskatchewan and looking at the role that nuclear power could play here in Saskatchewan. And there's a lot of interesting things about it at the time. I mean, zero emissions energy was very attractive to SaskPower. But at the time, it was just the technology wasn't right for SaskPower. It was the reactors were too large. I mean, they were more than 1,000 megawatts in size, which is far too big for Saskatchewan and really far too big for most jurisdictions in the world. I mean, there's a lot of nuclear power reactors in operation, but for a lot of the world, including Saskatchewan, large 1,000 megawatt nuclear reactors are simply too large for us to accommodate in our system. So that's where a lot of the work went. And a lot of the work over the last number of years has been focused around developing SMRs or small modular reactor technologies. And Darcy will speak more about that. But really some of the drivers for that were certainly, emissions, bringing emissions down, but also making nuclear reactors that could operate in more of the world, operate in utilities in places like Saskatchewan where we can't accommodate those big reactors. So the technology has been advancing to the point now where you're seeing a lot of work going on. You're probably seeing it in the news. A lot of jurisdictions in the United States, in Canada, Ontario, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and other places in the world, taking another look at nuclear power simply because the technology has advanced to a point where it can fit within their system. Another big driver for nuclear power, in addition to the technological advances that are making it applicable here, are climate change. Rochelle talked about federal regulations around climate change. But we're seeing a movement within Canada, around North America and the world to bring emissions down from the electricity sector, to allow for the electrification of other sectors of the economy. And that's another big driver for why we're taking a look at nuclear power now. Not only does it now fit, the technology now fit for Saskatchewan, but also as we move to bring our emissions down, it's a very viable technology that could be applied. But I'll say it isn't just nuclear power that we're looking at. Nuclear power is one of a variety of things that Saskatchewan is looking at, because nuclear power alone will not get us to where we need to be in the future as we move towards a net zero future. Maybe Travis, can you bring up the next slide? So in addition to things like nuclear power, we're also looking at energy from a variety of different sources. And certainly some are available now and some will become available in the future. The things that are available now are things like geothermal, biomass, energy storage. In the Estevan area, there's a company called Deep Earth, which is looking at doing a demonstration project for the first geothermal project here in Saskatchewan. And if that project works, it has applications across a big area of southern Saskatchewan. Biomass is something we're looking at. We're in partnership with Meadow Lake Tribal Council. We're looking at getting a large biomass facility in operation in the Meadow Lake area. And certainly energy storage right now from battery storage is something that we're looking at developing, and SaskPower is bringing online the first utility scale energy storage project just outside of Regina here in the coming years. So those are the things that we're looking at in the small scale. We are certainly looking at wind and solar power. We have a lot of wind on our system and a growing amount of wind. Solar power, as the prices come down, are certainly something that we're very interested in expanding and building more of here in Saskatchewan, but they still do require a backup. And right now that backup comes from things like natural gas fired generation. So we're also looking at, as we move away from conventional coal, looking at developing natural gas fired generation, hydroelectric power from existing facilities, as well as potentially new ones. We are also looking at strengthening our regional interconnections to allow us to import energy when needed, but also to export energy in the future. Carbon capture and storage on coal and natural gas are also things that we are still considering. But as you move beyond 2030, that's really where we see some of the new technologies come in. Certainly wind and solar will continue to be a big part of how we're going to bring our emissions down in the future. But in the future, you're going to see more and more storage, and not just storage from batteries, but also storage from compressed air, pumped hydro, and a lot of new technologies that are being developed. Hydrogen power is also something that, SaskPower, Sask Energy, Transgas, and a lot of the industry is looking at as well, because there's a big sections of the economy that if they want to bring their emissions down, they may not be able to electrify in the future and will require things like hydrogen to help them green up their industries as well. And then certainly nuclear power from small modular reactors are certainly one of those technologies that fits in here as we move beyond 2030. And it will be a combination of all of these technologies and probably other technologies that we haven't even talked about or haven't even been developed yet, will put Saskatchewan and other jurisdictions on a path to being net zero in the future. Let me go to the next slide, Travis. So the opportunity for SMRs, and I'll say for any of these low and non-emitting technologies, is really around emission reductions. What this graph shows is the blue line represents, a path that SaskPower could go on, which basically has us, as we retire conventional coal, we replace them with new natural gas facilities, and we maintain our emissions at our 50% emission reduction target from 2030 out to 2050. But the green line is the path that we're trying to move ourselves on. And that's really the opportunity for SMRs. By moving from that blue line to that green line, we potentially avoid up to 74 million tons of CO2 emissions. So that is the role and the opportunity, I think, for potentially for SMRs, as well as all other technologies, to help us put us on that path to a net zero or 100% emission reduction path in the future. Let me go to the next slide. So I think that's the high level what I wanted to cover to kind of set the context for the discussion on SMRs. And really, when we talk about SMRs is just one of the pathways we're looking at, but it will be SMRs potentially with a whole bunch of different technologies that will help set SaskPower and Saskatchewan up for the future. Happy to answer the question. I said I'm going to stay around here right to the end of the conversation at noon. So I'm happy to answer questions now or questions that might come up. And certainly, if you don't get a chance to ask a question now, feel free to get in touch with Leanne or Jackie or anybody, and they will put you in touch with myself or anyone from our team or anyone from SaskPower. We'll be happy to come down to your communities once we're able to, or certainly answer any questions you might have over the phone.
Thanks, Doug. I believe there are some questions that have come in. And so, Leanne, I'll let you handle those.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie. So yeah, there was a couple of questions kind of on the same theme to what Rochelle was talking about earlier about the importance of recruitment and retention, keeping our baseload plants in Estevan and Coronach running. So Rochelle, one of the questions was, I think with Moose Jaw, our gas plant coming online in Moose Jaw, the need for skilled operators is going to be more and more. And we had a couple of questions along the lines of what are we doing to ensure we have enough operators to operate our plants through 2030, especially once Moose Jaw is opened.
Thank you for the question. I've been the acting vice president of HR and safety for a couple of months now, so I share the concern that you're expressing, and I feel it very acutely. That we have a couple of challenges. SaskPower, of course, is part of government, so we have to work within the government framework. And we also need to partner with our unions on addressing this issue. No one contemplated this very unique situation when the collective bargaining agreements were drafted. So we're working through all of those issues. I do believe that we're going to have a plan that will address the need, but there are challenges, and there've been, I think we have to address it on several fronts. Recruitment and retention, certainly, but also training is important. As I mentioned in my remarks, sometimes it takes years to get the skills needed to operate the technology. So training is also going to be a big part of this.
Thanks, Rochelle. Doug, there was one question also for you about maybe talk just a little bit more about, somebody asked about the green path. I assume that means like reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You kind of talked about that, but
Sure.
maybe elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at how do we bring our emissions down and how do we bring them down in a way that fits for Saskatchewan. We've heard, we've been internally like a couple of years ago, we've been talking about, net zero by 2050. How do we get our emissions down by 2050? We hear the federal government now talking about being net zero by 2035. So 2035, it would be a very challenging target to get our emissions to net zero by 2035. 2050 might be too far out in the future for a lot of areas, and maybe too long to get there. So somewhere between 2035 and 2050 is where we have to get to. And I think where we're at right now is saying, what are the technologies we need and how do we slot them in to put us on a path that gives us the options of bringing our emissions down more quickly? So that's certainly where we're developing SMRs, battery storage, wind power, and things like that. And so we're certainly enabling ourselves with these types of technologies to put ourselves on that path. One of the things we're hearing, and it's not just hearing from, the public in Saskatchewan and Canada talking about net zero. We're starting to hear our industrial companies within Saskatchewan starting to talk about the need for SaskPower to bring our emissions down. Some of these companies compete on the international market, so they have to sell their products internationally, and their customers are asking them about how do they produce them? Are they producing them with cleaner energy? And so for the province and for these companies, we need to put ourselves on a path to do that. And so certainly developing and doing the work now so that we have SMRs as an option is really important for us. In addition to all the other work we're doing right now to roll out more and more solar and wind power, to develop more and more battery storage in the province, as well as developing those technologies like biomass and geothermal that can also help supplement. It'll be all of these technologies and others that will be required to get us to being net zero in the future. And it isn't a case of we just do SMRs or we just do wind and solar. It's the combination of these that's going to be required for us.
Thanks, Doug. There's a couple more questions that are kind of on the theme of our supply planning. One of them, I think Darcy will touch on a little bit with regard to specifically to an SMR facility in Saskatchewan. But The question is, will the Coronach and Estevan communities be prioritized for future projects since their main economic drivers will be shut down and they already have transmission? So transmission is one of the criteria, but there's lots of other technical criteria that we have to consider, but maybe just touch on that for to answer one of the that question.
Well, I'll leave Darcy to answer the question around nuclear power and the siting that we go into that. But certainly, one of the things when we're looking at building new power plants, there's a lot of things that go into the decision, whether it's a gas plant or a wind facility or solar or even an SMR. And one of the big things is do they have transmission lines there? Like transmission lines for us is a huge cost. So having those transmission lines in places like Estevan and Coronach do offer an advantage for generation to be in those areas. That has to be weighed, though, against other factors when we look at different technologies, but certainly that does provide a benefit to locating down in those locations. There are other factors, availability. If it's looking at a gas facility, it's availability of natural gas. For wind, you got to make sure you have wind. But certainly those sorts of things do factor into our decision-making where we locate projects. It's one of the big drivers for where we would locate projects. So certainly when you're looking at Estevan and Coronach, having that available transmission infrastructure down there certainly is an advantage to potentially locating generation in either of those communities.
Thanks, Doug. And there's one more question here about our focus on, or if we're looking at carbon capture on biomass. I know we've talked about that before, but yeah.
Like the technology, like carbon capture technology is certainly evolving, and there's lots of work going on in carbon capture and storage right now. We've done a lot of work on carbon capture and coal, but a lot of the focus is shifting to carbon capture and other things, such as natural gas. There's still a lot of natural gas that will be consumed in the future by SaskPower and others. So there's a lot of research going on now to look at what can be done for carbon capture and natural gas, as well as carbon capture on biomass. Biomass is an interesting one in that, the burning of biomass is considered carbon neutral. So if you burn the biomass and then replant trees, it's considered carbon neutral. So there is some research going on to say, well, could you make a carbon negative project, meaning you're actually taking more carbon out of the air than you're actually putting into it. And that's where carbon capture and biomass potentially has a role. So it's certainly something that we're looking at. We're monitoring what's going on in the industry with regards to that. We have been in discussions with a lot of different companies that are proposing different things. I think there's still a lot of work to go to get that technology to the point where it's technologically viable as well as economically viable. Like right now, one of the challenges, no one has really done specific research to say how would you capture carbon on a biomass facility. And certainly economics are something that we have to consider in any decisions we make. Certainly, we try as much as we can to minimize the impacts of our costs on our ratepayers. So certainly that's very important to SaskPower. So when you look at some of these technologies, the cost at which we can generate electricity, while it's technically feasible, may be economically unfeasible for SaskPower. But certainly, biomass or carbon capture on a variety of technologies is certainly something that not only SaskPower is looking at, but a lot of the industry is looking at as well.
Good, thanks. So one question about the proximity of Estevan to the US, I guess probably both Estevan and Coronach to the US as far as exporting. Does that, I guess, help our plans for exporting in the future?
Certainly. I mean, one of the big things that SaskPower is going to need to do, or Saskatchewan is going to need to do to help us through this energy transition, is the ability to import and export electricity. Certainly in the short term, if we can avoid building some natural gas here in the province or some generation in the province and import energy on the short term, that has benefits to us. But longer term, having those transmission lines that go out into other areas, into Manitoba, Alberta, and south to the US, have a lot of advantages for us as we develop things like wind, solar, and possibly SMRs in the future. Saskatchewan could be in a great position to export clean energy to other parts of North America, which really would keep us as that energy center here in Western Canada. So certainly having those large transmission lines that go to Estevan and Coronach that are very close to the border facilitate us taking those transmission lines and then extending them across the border into the US. So that's certainly one thing that we're very actively looking at right now.
Good, thanks. Just give people a couple of seconds to ask their questions if they want. If anybody feels like we haven't adequately answered, please go ahead and clarify, or we're happy to follow up with you after the session as well.
Yeah. We answer, like I say, I think about this stuff, like me and my group, we think about this stuff all the time. So sometimes when I answer questions, it may seem obvious to me that I'm answering a question, but in reality, I'm maybe not answering it at all. So, feel free to say, hey, you didn't quite answer my question. But certainly, there's going to be the need for a lot of discussions as we go forward, not just about SMRs, but about all the stuff we're doing, whether it's wind, battery storage, certainly transmission lines, all that kind of stuff. So this isn't the last time we're going to, I think Leanne probably said earlier, we'll say it certainly at the end, this is, and one of our VPs said, this is more of an opener, not a closer. This is one of many, many conversations we're going to have. So there'll be many opportunities to ask us questions in the future about all the stuff we're doing. Yeah. So.
For sure. So there's one more question, Doug, kind of that would fall to your area, and then I think we'll probably get into Darcy's section. But it's about what are the long-term generation of wind and solar? What does that look like in Alberta and Saskatchewan? They're talking about wind being intermittent and low output, and it's cold here. But overall, we know there are challenges with these renewables, but maybe just talk about what we're doing to add more wind and solar.
Well, certainly wind and solar are two of those technologies you're going to see a lot more in Saskatchewan. We've got some of the best wind and solar resources probably anywhere in North America, so we're really well set up for it. As Leanne pointed out, one of the challenges are they are intermittent. So we typically at SaskPower hit the peak usage of energy. So the most energy we ever need, it occurs in the wintertime after dark, usually in January or February, where people are coming home from work, starting to cook supper. That's when we hit our peak load. So I will guarantee there's no solar available. And quite often what we're seeing is sometimes the wind isn't available. So I certainly can't rely on them to be there all the time. And that's why right now we need backup for them. So the backup is coming from natural gas. In the future, the backup will come from things like battery storage or compressed air storage, so that we will be able to take excess wind and solar energy and store it and then use it when we need it, which will help firm them up. I'll say the technologies have also improved incredibly. Like I look at our very first wind farm we built compared to the brand new wind farms that are coming into operation. The new wind farms capture far more energy. So the need for us to have storage decreases there. So the technology is increasing, and you're going to see more and more wind and solar here in coming years. And hopefully later this year, we'll be able to roll out more of our renewable deployment strategy and start laying out a plan of how we're going to add those next blocks of wind and solar. I think in the next number of years, what you're really going to see is a lot of solar being added in Saskatchewan, because solar is one of those technologies where the prices come down a lot, but we're seeing a lot of advantages for solar to help us in the summertime. So, you know, last summer we saw really, really hot temperatures, and that would be a perfect opportunity when everybody's turning their air conditioners on. You're likely going to have lots of solar there. So I think it's finding those opportunities for them, but there will be tremendous growth in both solar and wind development here in Saskatchewan over the coming years, certainly as we move to bring our emissions down. It'll be one of the keys for doing that. I think both Estevan and Coronach are well set up for both solar and wind power projects possibly.
Doug, I know this isn't your area, and Rochelle had to run,
Sure.
but we did have one more question about, you know, I just want to acknowledge that we hear your concerns. There's someone in the chat or in the question that's asking about the need to not only for, you know, the skilled operators, but also skilled trades. That is absolutely something that at SaskPower that we're thinking about, focused on, and working towards, you know, like Rochelle said, the recruitment and retention strategies. But if you have anything else to kind of offer on that, just to reassure, or Leanne actually is.
Oh,
You
I'll
can
let Leanne jump in. I'll let Leanne
okay.
put her hand. I'll let Leanne answer it first, and I'll jump
Thanks,
in
Leanne.
after the fact. So.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a recognizing that we are having an increasing problem in retaining our skilled workers across the board. Operators were a concern because we needed those skilled operators to meet our licensing requirements. But SaskPower recognizes that unless we have the people that know how to run these plants on many levels, we're not going to be running them, and we need them. Doug will verify we need this electricity because wind and solar, the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. It's reliable electricity, and we intend to be using it into the foreseeable future until we have to retire it to those federal regulations.
Yep, no, I'll test that. I mean, we require these plants to run. Like, there's not plans to retire them tomorrow. We need these facilities, Coronach and certainly Poplar River and Boundary Dam, to continue operating. And so it's on us to work with the communities to make sure that we have the be able to retain employees at the plants, to make sure they can run safely and reliably, and then also make sure we've got all the trades that we require to run them. And this isn't just SaskPower trades, it's the other trades that help feed into this, particularly in a really competitive market right now. And we're seeing a lot of development in Saskatchewan from a lot of different industries building things. And so we need to make sure that we're working with the community to say, how do we make sure that we retain these workers in these communities? Because keeping these plants running is crucial for SaskPower, and we need to find a solution.
Lane, I will put my email and phone number in the chat. So if you want to follow up after this call, I'm more than welcome to take your questions.
Thank you, Leanne and Doug. I guess, last question around our supply plan.
Yep.
One of the questions, I'm not sure if you touched on this, about the lifetime expectancy for some of these technologies, especially wind, solar, and batteries, right? Like, what is that?
Yep.
What is the lifetime there?
Well, for wind, we typically plan for 25 years of life. Typically, we've seen them operating longer. You do get to the point where, you know, new technology comes along. Like, you're always replacing components of them, just like our existing power plants. You replace components over the lifetime. We plan for them to be there for 25 years. What we've seen is a lot of these facilities, including some of the SaskPower owned wind facilities, can last longer than 25 years. But you get to that point where other technology improves. So with wind facilities, we can keep 25-year-old wind turbines running, but a lot of times it's more economic to replace them with new wind turbines. But the benefits of having those sites developed for wind mean that you can take down existing turbines, put up new ones. So certainly we plan for wind to be 25 years. Solar, we also plan for 25 years. There are panels that need to be replaced in and out there. But again, as technology improves, sometimes you want to decommission a facility and build a more efficient one. Battery storage is one of those questions that, you know, we're still trying to work through. And that's one of the reasons we're adding a big battery storage project outside of Regina, is to really understand how long it will last and what the costs are going to be to operate it. Because you can get batteries that will run for 25 or 30 years, depending how you operate them. And so the more you operate them, you deplete them and you power them, you can shorten their life. So it's really understanding that. But again, we would probably plan for 15 or 25 years for battery storage facilities as well. But what usually drives us to replace things is that it's not that we can't keep fixing them or keeping them running. It's really technology has moved on and there's a more efficient technology out there. And with wind, it's usually bigger and better turbines that are getting bigger, higher, and are much more efficient at capturing the wind, is why we typically retire our old wind facilities and replace them. And the same would be for solar and batteries.
Good. Thanks so much, Doug. Jackie, how are we doing for time?
Well, we are at 1:45, so we are on track. I see there are some other questions in there, but I have a feeling they're more geared for Darcy. They look like they're a little bit more on the nuclear. So we had talked about having a 5-minute break, but because we have such an active amount of questions coming in, I think we should just keep going. This is the second SaskPower session that Estevan has been a part of. The Estevan Chamber has been a part of, and we want to make sure that we have more in the future. We want this conversation to continue. So there is a curiosity poll that I'm going to put up. Can everybody see that? And just take a minute to answer the question. So it is, I am most curious about, and select all that apply. Oh, here we go, it's coming in. So there's nuclear power, SMR projects, where the SMR could be located, the fuel and waste, jobs and economic development opportunities, and the cost. So this will help to basically direct our future conversations. And we're hoping that we'll be able to have a follow-up session with SaskPower as things progress. So I'm really just kind of trying to fill in time here by talking, because dead silence is kind of awkward for everyone. But so now I'm the only one feeling awkward instead of everyone. So we've got 38 out of 62 right now that have answered. So please, it's anonymous. We can't see how you're answering these questions. So I'll just keep watching them come in. And once we have the results in, I will let Kelsey talk about the results, and she will move forward with the next speaker. Okay, we're getting there. Kelsey, do you want to, is there anything upcoming in Coronach you want to talk about, just to fill in a little bit of time? Or
sure, while we wait for some more people to answer. Now, you guys, we'd really appreciate your feedback, because this will help us direct where future conversations go and what you guys want to hear about. So it's pretty important to us. Yeah, just the things going on in Coronach. Most people haven't already heard. In the beginning of the year, we launched our Coronach Downtown Renewal Project. So that's something on the town side we're pretty excited about. So everybody knows the water lines and sewer and all that are some of the oldest in town in our downtown area. So that will all be replaced, and new sidewalks and paving. So something we're pretty excited about in the business district here in Coronach. So
thanks. Thanks, Kelsey. It looks like we're getting all the responses that we're going to get. It's been at 47 out of 62 for a while. So I'm going to hit end poll, unless somebody wants to quickly get their answer in. All right, so let's take a look at the results. All right, can everyone see the results?
yeah, so a lot of people are interested in where the SMRs could be located. That kind of came to the top of the list in SMRs in general. Obviously, with the group we have, jobs and economic development is another large portion. So kind of everybody's a little interested in everything, but yeah, SMR and the jobs and economic development, you know, they're at the top of your guys' list, like they are for top of our list as well. So good to know.
Jackie,
thank you guys very much.
Can you save that for us, just so we have it to design future sessions around?
Absolutely. I actually, because I don't know if it saves or not, I'll just take a screenshot.
Yeah, okay.
And then I'll have it on multiple formats in case it gets lost.
Thank you.
All right. So
Perfect.
Kelsey, why don't we move forward with the next introduction? Thanks.
That's, yeah. Speaking of wanting to know more about SMRs, so next we'll have Darcy Holderness speak to you guys more specifically about that. So Darcy has managed a number of large projects at SaskPower and spent a good deal of time in Estevan, working at the Boundary Dam Power Station on the carbon capture and storage demonstration project. He's now the SMR project manager, and he's here to introduce that project to us. So welcome, Darcy, and we'll let you take over.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. You can hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll run through, I guess, a lot about nuclear power, what we're doing to develop this supply option as one. It's one option under Doug's area and need to manage this transition away from emissions. So a lot of the feasibility is these SMRs represent an opportunity, an evolution in the nuclear industry that makes nuclear power a lot more feasible for grids like our size. And so you combine that with the need to manage our emissions, and we have to be looking at SMRs really comes to the forefront when you consider those two things. So we'll go through it. We'll talk a lot about what these SMRs are, the waste they produce, how nuclear power works in general, and then a lot of an overview on where we're at in terms of the development project and what we're calling the planning phase for the project. So can keep going here, Travis. And again, so a little bit, a very high level overview of a nuclear power plant, very similar to our existing thermal power plants. I think you'll see once you generate the steam from the thermal energy that you get from nuclear power or from nuclear fission, it's all identical. So we're very used to the steam cycle that drives the turbine and generates electricity. You'll always have a need to reject leftover heat and condense that low energy steam back into water so that you can re-energize it and move it back through your boiler, your steam generator, however that is designed. And so this is a schematic. I mean, the main difference with a nuclear power plant is your thermal energy comes from a nuclear fission reaction. So you'll have a reactor with a fuel assembly inside there generating that thermal energy and a means to pull the heat out and generate steam. And so that's the real difference. And so although SaskPower knows a lot about turning steam into electricity and managing all of that infrastructure, there's a lot that we don't understand about managing a nuclear reactor. And so everything that is within the containment side of the nuclear island is really, we have to do a lot of work in Saskatchewan to understand everything that it takes to do that safely and do it and be a qualified licensee for this type of facility. Can you advance? So one thing that we don't know, or one thing that is a little known to us in Western Canada is the breadth and it's the depth of the nuclear industry in Eastern Canada. And so there's many, it's a thriving industry in Eastern Canada. And this is a picture of an existing conventional reactor. This is the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station. So it's located just outside of Toronto. I think there's about 6 million people that live within 100 kilometers of this facility. And it sits right on the shores of Lake Ontario. So Lake Ontario is the means of cooling that steam once they generate the electricity for Darlington, and at least one other big nuclear power station sits on the same lake. But this is there's 4 reactors that sit inside this facility. It kind of gives you an idea of the size of the facility. Each of those reactors, they're large conventional reactors. So these are in the 800 megawatts per reactor range. So I think it's 3,500 megawatt electrical output for this plant. It could power all of Saskatchewan on most days. But it's allowed, it had allowed for a thriving nuclear industry. So the supply chain is well developed. The construction industry in the nuclear space is well developed in Eastern Canada. And it's really important for us as we look to build this capacity out west, potentially, that we partner with that industry and these operators, and we leverage the know-how that Canada has in the nuclear space as we look to explore developments out west. It's also allowed for the industry to grow up with a regulator. The CNSC, who I know was introduced and is here with us today, is highly respected at the global stage as a nuclear regulator. They're very mature, and their process and standards are well set up to manage everything nuclear. So right from uranium mining to research reactors, medical isotopes, obviously power reactors, and then the waste, the used nuclear fuel storage and management, and it all falls under the jurisdiction of the CNSC, and they're a very mature regulator in Canada. This one other note on this site, so the Darlington site, it's owned and operated by Ontario Power Generation, or OPG, and it's already licensed for a new nuclear development. So this facility, just on the kind of the top of the facility, or the eastern shoreline, is where the first SMR could be deployed in Canada. So we're really looking to work with OPG as they deploy an SMR there to build understanding, learn about the risks and the costs, and as we look to develop a project in Saskatchewan, this partnership is really key for us. Next slide. So SMRs, yeah, conventional nuclear reactors are all in the large category. So it's kind of greater than 750, typically 800 to 1,000 megawatts per reactor. And the small aspect of the SMRs speaks to that electrical output. So the industry kind of defines it as 50 to 300 megawatts electrical output. And SaskPower would be targeting construction projects right on the upper end of that. So right around 300 megawatts per decision is what we're looking at. From a regulator perspective, there is no difference here between small, medium, or large reactors. They're all Class 1A nuclear facilities, and they all fit into the CNSC's requirements in the same way. The modular aspect, so the idea with these smaller reactors are that a lot of the reactor components, the pressure vessels and major equipment, are sized and designed so that they can be fabricated in a shop environment, off-site. And so you're looking to really reduce the risk of the construction phase. So big projects like these do see cost overrun issues, schedule delays can affect the economics of the project to a high degree. So the idea is that the modular design can enhance and improve the risk profile in that way. And of course, reactor, the thermal energy comes from a nuclear fission. These are Class 1A nuclear facilities, so it's same as conventional in that manner. Next slide. So a bit about the technologies. Canada has been doing a very good job of taking a unified approach to assessing this technology. So National Resources Canada, the federal agency there, they've done a lot of work to put together this national approach and a pan-Canadian strategy. They issued a roadmap for SMRs in 2018, and then an action plan came out in 2020. And that really is an agglomeration of existing nuclear operators, jurisdictions considering nuclear as a means to manage emissions, like SaskPower, the nuclear supply chain. A lot of the engineering and consultants have contributed to this action plan, and so it really has a full spectrum. Academics has contributed a lot as well, the universities. And so there's three streams of deployment being considered in Canada, and they're shown here a little bit. So stream one is is on-grid utility scale SMRs, so right around that 300 megawatts, and this is a near term. So deployed by the end of the 2020s. And that Darlington project is going to be the first demonstration for Stream 1 SMR deployment in Canada. And it's been a major focus of SaskPower. So we've focused and we've done a lot of work with OPG dating back to 2017. We started reviewing technologies and assessing things. We ended up just in 2021 with this short list of 3 designs that were looked at very closely. If anybody's been following the news, OPG just announced in December that they have selected GE Hitachi's boiling water reactor for deployment at that Darlington site. So that is the reactor that they're building, and they're developing a project around that reactor. And SaskPower, we've now completed our technical evaluation, and we'll be ready to move our recommendation through our governance process and our shareholder in terms of are we going to align with OPG and follow suit with the GE Hitachi reactor, or do something else, maybe defer that decision or consider other things for Saskatchewan. So that recommendation and decision will come out in the first half of 2022. We'll be making that announcement. But a lot of work. It's been 4 years and a lot of work with OPG, other partners, Bruce Power and Tennessee Valley Authority. New Brunswick Power has been a big factor in SMR considerations. And it's culminated in this final technical evaluation, and OPG has done their decision now, and it's SaskPower that needs to make the next big announcement in this space. Stream 2 is another on-grid kind of utility scale size reactors that are being looked at in New Brunswick. These are a little bit more advanced designs, and they're a little bit later deployment time frame. So I think New Brunswick Power is looking at deploying these reactors in the early 2030s or mid 2030 time frame. And so they do come with a little bit more opportunities too, though. The Moltex reactor, for example, it repurposes used fuel from Canada's existing reactors. That all of Canada's existing reactors, including the 4 that are at Darlington and many others in Canada, are based on the CANDU technology. They're CANDU reactors. It's a homegrown Canadian design that has allowed for that nuclear industry to flourish in Eastern Canada. And it's been exported around the world too. I think there's 4 continents with CANDU reactors operating in them, and Canada's nuclear industry has benefited to a high degree from that design and implementation of that reactor. So the Moltex design actually takes used fuel from those CANDU reactors and repurposes it as its incoming fuel to get a little bit more efficiency and energy out of the uranium life cycle there. Stream 3 is 2 very small reactors, so they're in the 5 megawatt electric range that are being developed in Canada. So there's a couple of projects. OPG is partnered with a company called the Ultrasafe Nuclear Corp, and that's Global First Power, and they have a project for a 5 megawatt electric reactor that's going to be implemented in Chalk River. Proposed for around the mid to late 2020s for that one as well. Westinghouse also has a design that Bruce Power has done a lot of feasibility work around, also in that 5 megawatt electric kind of output. Keep going there, maybe.
Darcy, before you go to the next slide, I wonder, we had a question here about the construction process, and I thought I just don't want anybody to get the wrong idea that we're in any way not like maximizing Saskatchewan value here. So I invite Ian to offer some comments on the question is, why offsite construction? We have trades on site maintenance. Why would we not use our current talent to reconstruct or build new replacement parts? So Ian, if you wouldn't mind taking that.
Yeah, it's modular construction doesn't mean that that the work doesn't get done in Saskatchewan. The objective of the long-term goal of for developers of small modular reactor technologies is that the plants would be built in modules in a factory setting to drive down costs and drive up quality, kind of like what you see in the airline industry is a good example of that. But constructing a nuclear power plant takes place primarily, almost entirely at the site. It's just that the construction process is partly modular. And so when we talk about small modular reactors, some of the plant will be built in modules, not all of it. And so when you think about the deployment of, there's a question in the chat about what's the construction plan? Are we going to put multiple SMRs at one location? Our plan is to advance with one 300 megawatt power plant at one site, and then add a second 300 megawatt plant at the same site, and then do it again at a second site. So the construction of the first unit is a multi-billion-dollar process, and all of the supply, all of the work almost all the work of constructing the plant takes place at site. The modules will come. In some cases, there'll be modules that are deployed at site. But if you think about constructing a power plant, nuclear power plant's no different. We have to. There's a whole lot of work to be done by the trades, by the cement guys, civil, like the construction of buildings, and the nuclear island is not even 50% of the total build. So. We think it's in the $3.5 billion range for the first project, and we expect that about 80% of that value, not including the turbine generator units, is going to flow to Saskatchewan-based firms. So there's a huge opportunity, very large economic opportunity. I think Darcy will speak to the size of the economic impact of deploying SMRs. But don't connect. I mean, modular construction of SMRs doesn't mean that somehow all the work is done somewhere else. The vast majority of the work is done at site where the plant's being deployed.
Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, definitely. And we do have some information on kind of the potential impact of the construction phase for this type of generation option. And we absolutely measure that. And as we look to kind of leverage the knowledge and the depth of the nuclear industry out east, building Saskatchewan capacity and developing that competence here is an absolute focus of our project. So maximizing opportunity and benefit to Saskatchewan, our province, is our priority. But we have to do it in a as safe with a low of risk profile as possible. So you look to leverage the learnings and knowledge to build that capacity here, but do it in the optimal way possible, I guess, is the goal of the project. This picture shows you, it's a concept sketch of what the Darlington facility may look like. So SMRs, they are a newer technology. The GE Hitachi deployment, that boiling water reactor at Darlington will be the first of its kind built. That reactor it's the X in the BWRX 300 speaks to the 10th generation of its design. So it is based on a design a larger design that has been implemented around North America more broadly. But sized down to the smaller kind of size. But so the supply chain, the fuel is well understood and established. The operating characteristics are better known for this type of reactor than some of the newer designs out there. So in terms of project risk and implementing it and on the time frame that has been put together for Stream 1, that's a lot of the reasons why this reactor was selected. We can keep going. This gives you a size of the facility though compared to those conventional reactors. The SMRs, they are an evolution of the nuclear industry. And this quote from John Gorman, who's the president of the Canadian Nuclear Association, he's got a really interesting story. If you get a chance to hear him speak, you should listen to him. He comes from the renewable industry, so he spent a lot of time developing, I think his focus was solar and bringing those costs down. And he was part of the huge uptake in deploying renewables in Canada and around the world. But he didn't see a lot of the needle wasn't moving on emissions. And so then he kind of looked to the nuclear world to start helping with that story. And so now he's the president of the Canadian Nuclear Association. And his quote here, comparing SMRs to conventional reactors as desktops are compared to what mainframes were in the 80s. So it gives you a sense. The SMRs, they represent next level in terms of safety and environmental stewardship for the nuclear industry. Next slide. Yeah, so small reactors, but they're still mega construction projects. So the construction phase of this project would be measured in the billions of dollars. And that of course comes with economic impact for the province that you can measure in GDP. And we've done some of that work. So there's some numbers here that were based on a feasibility study that looked at deploying 4 300 megawatt facilities in Saskatchewan between around the early 2030s to the early 2040s. And then they would operate for 60, 70 years beyond that time frame. And so when you think about construction phase, it's in the range of 1,700 jobs that are created just to build out that fleet over that 10-year time frame. And then operating phase, it's I think we're around the 700 jobs or so. So that economic impact is being measured. It's very much on our radar. And as we can look to make future decisions on the pathway we're going to take for the power industry, that those types of factors are considered. So I'd also this will help to offset some of the economic loss that will be realized in the province when we phase out conventional coal. It helps to reduce our reliance on natural gas. There's still emissions with natural gas power, and there's volatility in the price of that fuel as well. So kind of not putting all our eggs into that basket in a strategy that has a mix of generation options it helps a lot. And I mean, supporting aggressive deployment of renewables, any pathway we take in Saskatchewan is going to have an aggressive deployment of renewable power. And so it's important to integrate any pathway with that bottom line, if you will. Storage will help kind of supplement the reliability factor. But so we look at SMRs as trying to complement and support an aggressive deployment of renewables to the degree it can. The next slide. So some of the key requirements, I mean, we've been doing a lot of feasibility work in this space over the last decade plus. And it produced what we've called key requirements for success in taking where we're at today as a greenfield jurisdiction and becoming a qualified nuclear operator of this technology. And so the first 3 bullets here speak to the need to manage the new technology aspect in the greenfield jurisdiction that we are. And so it's building those partnerships, seeing a first of a kind successful deployment of the technology. If we're going to take on new technology risk and look at building our capacity as a nuclear operator in Saskatchewan, it just amounts to too much. And so we really want to see somebody implement the technology and a qualified nuclear operator successfully build it and operate it before we do so in Saskatchewan. Indigenous participation is a key requirement. It's a huge opportunity. So as you build a new industry out west, there's opportunity for Indigenous participation in a lot of different aspects in that regard. And so it's not just an opportunity. We viewed it as a key requirement as we develop this project. Federal risk sharing, that's really speaking to some help with funding. It takes a lot of investment to develop to deploy new technology, and SMRs are very similar to other new technologies in that regards, in that it's you want partners with the federal government as a risk sharing entity. And so through our what we're calling the planning phase, we would look for funding to help us evaluate and develop this project, and then maybe some help with financing as you get into the construction phase. They do come with there's a large price tag on the construction phase, and the financing for that is a significant factor when you consider your build. Ultimately, though, this comes down to the price of power. So we have to maintain a competitive price of power in Saskatchewan. It drives our industry, and keeping the risk profile as low as possible and the price as low as possible for power in Saskatchewan is critical. So SMRs have to be competitive with other generation options in their time, and that's how decisions will be made ultimately. So a little bit that's kind of nuclear power, Leanne.
Yeah, sorry, there's just, I just wanted to acknowledge that there are some really good questions in the Q&A box. And I think each of the ones that have been asked, you're actually going to talk about. So I just didn't want people to think that we weren't answering their question. I will ask Tarek or one of his colleagues to just, not right now, but in a few minutes, just maybe there's a couple of questions that it might help if you kind of explained, the CNSC's role in the licensing process. Maybe after the used fuel and waste piece, if you could, I'll call on you to maybe talk about that a little bit. Thanks.
Yeah, sounds good. So use nuclear fuel, and there's other waste components, nuclear waste components that need to be managed as part of this project is a big part of the evaluation and story that we need to understand to a high degree. And so there's a little bit of information here. So this is a used fuel storage facility existing in Ontario. I think this is the Bruce Power plant, their dry storage for used nuclear fuel. And so this is all of the existing reactors in Canada. They store their used nuclear fuel and their other nuclear waste components on site for the most part. And this is long-term storage. So used nuclear fuel will be, after it's spent and done its part in the reactor, is removed. It'll be transferred into a wet storage, is how the CANDU designs are operated, for a period of time of I think it's 5 to 7 years before it cools enough and can be transferred into the dry storage canisters, similar to what you see here, and put in a facility like this. And so this is the Bruce Power Plant is a 6,300 megawatt nuclear facility. And I've been told this is about 5 years of waste, what you can see in this picture. A 300 megawatt SMR operating for 60 years in Saskatchewan. I've been told you could fit the used nuclear fuel in about a double car garage. So the volume really is not, it's not huge, and it has to be managed safely. So there's a lot of safeguards and nuclear security type aspects that need to go into the management of the used nuclear fuel, but the volumes are quite manageable. These types of canisters will be transferred to a facility in Ontario that is being built by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. So it's a Canadian organization. It's fully funded by the existing nuclear operators in Canada, and they've got billions of dollars. I think it's tens of billions of dollars in the bank to develop and manage a permanent solution for all of Canada's used nuclear fuel. And so that project, they're selecting a site in Ontario. They're down to 2, I think, in Ontario. One pretty soon, and it's hopeful to be in operation in the early 2040s. Not for a while yet, but but that it'll be a deep geological repository. So they're going to take all of the used nuclear fuel from CANDU reactors and any new reactors built in Canada and store it 500 to 800 meters underground. And so our project, storage on site, will be a big part of our project. But we would look to, at some point in the future, transfer the used nuclear fuel to that site in Ontario. Next slide. So that's used nuclear fuel. There's other types of waste that you have to manage as well. And so high level waste is what you categorize as the used fuel, the spent uranium after it's out of the reactor. Intermediate level waste are things like life cycled reactor components, mechanical parts, pumps, things like that come out of the containment area of the reactor, and they have to be managed for a period of time. This is a long time, so it's hundreds of years that these components will remain hazardous due to their exposure to the nuclear process. And that's managed as well. So the volumes are higher when you consider these types of waste to that type of waste, but they are a bit easier to manage as you go down to the lower levels. Low level waste are anything from PPE, used mop heads, coveralls, to things that are still have some level of radiation in them, and so they have to be managed. But the management systems to look after and safely store and this type of waste are much more easier to look after. So the volumes do go up as you move down the chain here, but the management systems and the things you have to do to look after it safely do become more manageable as well. So our project has to develop and we have to show the regulator that we've got a plan to manage all forms of waste from our power plant. And the nuclear industry is actually the only form of electrical generation that has to look after every aspect, every single bit of waste that is produced is tracked and ultimately governed by the CNSC. So that might be a good segue for Tarek or Leanne if we want to have him explain a little bit about that process and how it works.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. There was a question that came to us about has there been any consideration to how used solar panels and used wind turbines, how they're recycled and reclaimed? And I was commenting in the response that, as far as I know, nuclear power is the only, like you said about the waste as well, it's the only option where you have to have that cradle to grave licensing plan, right, for throughout the operations of the facility, but then decommissioning the units and then abandoning the site so that it looks exactly the way it looked before you started. So I thought, I agree. I think it'd be a good time for Tarek or one of your colleagues, Tarek, to just kind of walk us through, if you could, in 2 minutes, a very complicated process, the regulatory kind of oversight that the CNSC has for waste management, but also the regulations associated with operating a nuclear facility for the safety case and such. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Leanne and Darcy, for the opportunity to comment on this. And I'll start off with the general idea of licensing, then I'll ask Gavin if he wants to add any more information on the waste aspect of it. But in general, the CNSC, we have been regulating all nuclear life cycle activities for more than 70 years. So our mandate is just simply put to regulate the use of nuclear energy and protect and materials to protect health, safety, security, environment, to implement Canada's national commitments for the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and to disseminate objective scientific, technical, and regulatory information to the public. And as Darcy mentioned earlier on in his presentation, we look at all aspects of nuclear, from when we take out uranium from the mine to when we process it, put it in NPPs and nuclear facilities, all the way into waste management and decommissioning. And the way we approach it, we have a very robust and rigorous licensing process. We break it up into 4 separate steps. So there is a license to prepare site, license to construct, license to operate, and license to decommission. And in each of these stages, we look at the full cycle. So even if SaskPower goes to submit a license to our site, we will be looking to understand the waste management activities and processes that they will have in place, even before we get to a more mature license to like a licensed construct or operate. So we really take a full holistic picture of all licensed activities. And we have very well established regulations and regulatory documents to cater to this licensing process. And irrespective of whether it's a new or mature licensee, all licensees will have to follow and meet our requirements to be able to operate and leverage the benefits of nuclear technology in Canada. And once and if a license is issued, we don't stop there. We perform compliance activities. So we'll have inspectors on site, or they will go to the site depending on the location, and we'll perform monitoring activities, inspections of varying levels of rigor to ensure that the licensee are operating the power plant and conducting it per the license requirements. And this goes on for the whole life cycle of the power plant. And we issue licenses on a set periodic basis. So every so often, the licensee will have to come back to the commission to request a renewal for the license. And that gives us an opportunity to ensure any advancements, any changes in industry or knowledge is captured and is continually improved. And that's in general. I'll be happy to answer any other questions. And if I could, if there's more interest on the waste management aspect, I could push that off to Gavin to respond.
I think we're good so far, Tarek. I don't know if Ian or Darcy wanted to maybe add to any of that, or Gavin, if you wanted to, please feel free.
I'll jump in here and just to add a little bit more to what Tarek said, in particular to waste management. In Canada, Natural Resources Canada sets the federal policy for nuclear waste in this country, and the underlying principle to it is the polluter pays principle. So whoever the organization or company that produces nuclear waste in this country, they are responsible for the management and disposal of that waste. So it's important to keep in mind that we make that in Canada, there is a very strong policy for ensuring the safe management and disposal of nuclear waste. And Darcy touched on the future permanent disposal facility, the deep geological repository that Canada is working to construct, and hopefully in the near future through the Nuclear Waste Management Organization.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks,
That's
yep.
Good. I think we can keep going here. So we'll get into now a bit more on the actual project that we've put together to develop this supply option and this planning phase that we're in now, and kind of short and long-term milestones of the project. So this is a long-term milestone, or a long-term milestone chart. It's about a 15-year time frame you're going to see on the bottom, and we just got approval from our board in March of 2021. So we're about a year into what we're calling the planning phase, and that's going to take it's going to take 8 or 9 years before we're ready to make decisions on whether we build or not this type of technology. So those decisions to transition to the construction phase will happen right around the end of this decade. 2029, 2030 timeframe, we'll look to make decisions to go or no go on construction. And if it's a go, it would be about another 4 years of building and commissioning the facility, and then we'd hit operation late 2033 or 2034 at the earliest. And so there's lots of work to go through here, and the first two things, kind of as we get into the planning phase, the first two things we need are we have to find a site, and we have to zone in on technology. And so really the driver for I talked about technology and where we're at. We've been partnering and doing a lot of work in this space over the last 4 years evaluating all of the options out there, and we ended up with a short list of 3 in 2021. And OPG has made an announcement for their project, and SaskPower is in the process of finalizing that. So the announcement on how the project is going to manage the technology selection will be coming in 2022 here. From a site perspective, that our critical path for this time frame is finding a site. We need to have it in place before we can start to move through the regulatory processes of the impact assessment and things like that. But we've got a model developed. It's a 3-year time frame before we're going to find that site. Year 1, which is wrapping up now, is based on a lot of technical work. So we've got a little bit of information on some of the factors there in the next slide, but it's really about understanding the needs of the machine, the regulatory requirements, and the utility requirements. Where does SaskPower need the power or have transmission infrastructure to move it around? So a lot of that work has been done, and it's resulted in regions that may be technically preferred for this type of development. And so we'll be looking in 2022, the year 2 of that siting process, to figure out, a lot of our work in terms of finding the site is going to be done in 2022. We need to look at having a very short list of site, maybe a couple of sites, actual land parcels picked, that we can take into some characterization in 2023, and then have that final site selected by the end of 2023 and then purchased in 2024. And then once we have our site at the end of 2023, it lets us start our impact assessment. And so this project will trigger a full federal impact assessment under the new 2019 legislation that's put in place. And that takes about 5 years. So from the time we submit our initial project description in early 2024, it won't be till early 2029 before we expect to have a decision whether we can proceed with a development at that site. And there's a lot of work that has to happen in there. There's some of these are legislated timeframes. We would be the first nuclear project to move through the new legislation that the federal government has to complete an impact assessment. And so there's risk in that, and we have to do what we're doing a lot of work in the pre-planning stage to engage with the regulators early to make sure we streamline and we move through this process and check all of the regulators' boxes, but do so without risk of pushing these timelines out later, and do it as efficiently and as streamlined process as we can. So not only do we do the impact assessment through that process, we also get the first license from the CNSC, which is a license to prepare the site. So the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada will work with the CNSC in an integrated review panel to at the end of that assessment process, we hope to have an impact assessment decision and the first license, that license to prepare a site. And that lets you move through. We'll also have to go through a federal impact, a provincial impact assessment, and we would look to integrate that along the same time frame with again. So you may have one assessment with 3 decisions on the outside if you include the provincial one as well. So we'd get that license in about early 2029, we think. And then there are 2 other licenses that we need to get from the CNSC kind of before you build and put a nuclear power plant into operation, and that is a license to construct, and if we click once more, there'll be a license to operate. So those are the other 2 big licenses that you need, and as you transition into construction and operation, it takes a significant amount of effort and resources to put those applications together and show the CNSC that we're qualified to first prepare the site, then build a nuclear reactor, and then operate one, right? And so those processes really allow you to transition into the construction phase. So you need a site, then you need to license your site, and then you can start prepping and building. So as you get the site license, you can start doing some prep work. You can move some dirt around and prep the site for a nuclear reactor, and then you get your construction license and you can start building. You can build and put everything in place, and then you have an operating license before you actually commission that reactor into service. And so this time frame is really needed, and it takes a long time. This is why it takes a long time to develop nuclear power. Any major project is going to require that impact assessment, and nuclear power is really a next level type of regulatory requirements from that perspective. So a lot of work needed to enable this time frame and have this be an option by around that 2034, the mid 2030s is the goal. One more click and we can't say enough how important our engagement is on this project. So we as we evaluate this option and we build an understanding of what it takes to operate a nuclear power plant and manage all of the security aspects, become a qualified jurisdiction, build our supply chain and things like that. The engagement is critical. So being able to communicate in an open and transparent way as we go through everything is a huge part of our project, and that's why we really appreciate the partnerships and the opportunities with community associations and the general public through forums like this to share and hear what the concerns are from the public as we look at this technology. One last little comment on the timeline. So we talked about a first mover project. Not only is it important that we advance and we successfully get through the regulatory processes needed to make these decisions, we also want to see that first mover project and a qualified nuclear operator demonstrate the technology. And so that timeline is shown on the bottom. That Darlington new nuclear project that OPG is advancing, they hope to be in service by as early as late 2028. And so that would let them have an SMR in operation before we make any construction decisions in Saskatchewan. So in terms of understanding the cost, demonstrating the management systems for the build and the operation and the management of used nuclear fuel and other forms of waste for this technology, it's really important to us that we see that demonstrated beforehand, and then it reduces our risk, right? What is the actual price tag of the construction phase will be shown before we have to make that decision. How are you going to fabricate and build the facility, the supply chain development? As we look to have a shovel-ready project by the end of the 2020s in Saskatchewan, a lot of work is going to have to be done on building a workforce, developing training capacity, R&D in the nuclear space has to be advanced, supply chain competence and capacity in the supply chain. So those are aspects that will have to be developed and advanced through the 2020s to get ready for that construction phase come 2029, 2030. And so there's a lot of investment needed in those areas, and work is being done to set that up even right now. We're starting to plan that out and make those considerations. Leanne, do you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, before you move on to, or sorry, we want to move on to siting, but there are some really good questions about construction and timing and such. So I thought, just because we want to make sure that we touch on all of the siting considerations, that's a really important part of our project. I didn't want people to think that we're moving on. We'll definitely come, sorry, that we're not getting to your questions. We'll definitely come back and address those questions if Darcy hasn't touched on them. But yeah, go forward and start talking about siting, because I think that's definitely something people are interested in as well.
Yeah, so the siting, like I mentioned, we've done a lot of work on understanding the technical requirements. So the requirements of the machine, we've modeled the project around once through cooling design. So very similar to how we operate most of our large thermal plants, our coal plants, is with a cooling or a water body to reject that leftover heat after you've taken all the electricity out of it that you can. We've modeled the project with that same design in place right now. So the water requirements are a substantial factor when you're considering siting this type of technology, and that's shaped a lot of our regions that may be technically preferred are restricted a little bit by water, because it is a valued resource in Saskatchewan, and how we use that water for industrial applications is important to measure and look at very closely. So we can look at other forms of cooling, and we'll be looking at alternative means there and doing that type of analysis. But the siting work has been focused on as low of technical risk as possible, and that has been done with some conservative estimates on water for once through cooling. And so what the water requirements for a nuclear power plant, very similar to what we know and how we operate our coal facilities. We have assumed a little bit more water is required for a nuclear thermal power plant compared to a coal. You don't lose any of that rejected heat through a stack. So I think some of the auxiliary cooling is a little bit higher for a nuclear power plant compared to a coal, but very similar. From a regulator standpoint, we have to show that we can safely construct and build. So we've got a workforce available that can be trained and is qualified to build and operate a nuclear power plant. Emergency services infrastructure there is key. So if there is an incident or something happens with the facility, you've got infrastructure that can safely manage anything that might happen or come up. And so a lot of showing the regulator that you have a safe way you've got the people and resources to safely operate your facility is a part of that story as well. We've found, and that shaped a lot of the regions that may be technically preferred too. Utility requirements. I mean, we've talked about the regional need for power and where do we have the infrastructure to move the power around. And so that factors into a huge degree when you think about the cost. We don't want to rebuild our transmission infrastructure in the province just for this first project. So managing cost and technical risk is very important. We've got a lot of extra things that we have to develop for the first project in Saskatchewan. And so keeping the requirements and the risk as low as possible in those other technical areas is important. So then this next phase, we're going to move away from that and really into the feedback mode for siting. So we're going to be releasing a lot of our work in terms of the technical analysis early this spring, and where these regions are that may be technically preferred. We're just in the midst of finalizing that and getting ready to take it to the street, so to say. So looking at harvesting Indigenous knowledge and community feedback is the next phase, and 2022 is going to see a lot of that. So a lot of the criteria and the suitability and how we kind of fit and develop this type of project, working with the communities, Indigenous peoples especially, to consider impacts and how are we looking at everything we need to look at. As we look for specific sites within these regions, it's really important that we're talking to people. So 2022 that's all going to be rolled out, and then we'll look by the end of 2022 to get all of that feedback back and then adjust the criteria, use it to adjust our criteria and tweak things and make sure we have as optimal of a site as we can. And so that's the next stage and where we're going. And then in 2023, we can take a very short list of specific sites that are suitable and start doing some characterization work, which is actual instruments in the ground, looking at geotechnical thing, geology and water table considerations, and then picking our final site in 2023. But a lot of that work is really the focus of 2022 is the feedback loop. So stay tuned, I guess, for that. Very shortly here, we'll be making some announcements and then looking to re-engage on the siting phase of the project. So I think we have one last slide here, and then hopefully 20 minutes for more questions or discussion. Just a bit, I mentioned supply chain development. So a couple of things that are happening even right now to consider supply chain development in the SMR space that we really want to share and get out there. Some work that PrairiesCan is doing is this first bullet. So PrairiesCan it's formerly Western Diversification. It's the economic development arm of the federal government for Western Canada. And so PrairiesCan is doing some work on supply chain readiness and a bit of an analysis on capacity in Western Canada for particularly for SMRs. And so there's some studies that they've done. They've created an asset map. They'll be looking to validate it and undertaking a more in-depth kind of supply chain study in 2022. So there's information available on their website. And if you have any questions or are interested in this and can't find information, come back to us and we'll put you in touch with the right people. One other one is there's an organization for Canadian nuclear industries, OCNI. They have a Ready for SMR program. And so they're piloting this in New Brunswick initially, and then Saskatchewan is a big focus for them. So they're looking to build capacity in the SMR space. This is how you become a nuclear qualified fabrication shop or constructor. Like in New Brunswick, I know they're looking at shipbuilders, companies that are qualified as shipbuilders, and they're saying, what would it take for you to make the leap to a nuclear qualified supplier? And so that Ready for SMR program, there's information through OCNI, and they'll be looking to come out to Saskatchewan and start building capacity that way. So these are early things. It's a long-term project, but it takes a while to build this capacity. So it's important that we're doing this as a unified province, and we're engaging with the supply chain we depend on you guys just as much as you depend on us for success here. So hopefully this information can help and we can start thinking about this future.
Thanks, Darcy.
That's it.
So just quickly, if you could go to maybe just the next slide, Travis. So I just want to pick up really quickly before we get to the questions on what Darcy was saying about the need for Indigenous engagement and community engagement. Very much through the early phase of this project, we're sharing information out, right? And as Darcy said, we're very quickly going to be moving into a much more robust engagement and consultation process, where we're not just going to be sharing information, but we're going to be specifically asking for your feedback on some of the technical criteria that we have identified we're going to need to guide our siting decisions. So in the meanwhile, we have some means for you to stay in touch on the project. We have a specific SMRE newsletter that we've set up. We've got some information on our project page. I'm going to send you a link out to our feedback form that we'd love to get your feedback on. The project page link is there. We'll have these slides posted up on the Estevan Chamber website. And then there's a couple other things coming up at SaskPower. As Doug was saying earlier, it's not all about SMRs. We need a number of different options to power the province, but we've got net metering consultation program coming up, where we're going to be asking people for input on distributed energy planning in Saskatchewan. That's smaller scale solar, for example, and then also just an overall understanding of how we need to plan the grid to accommodate all these different energy resources. So I just wanted to quickly touch on that before we get into some of the questions about, specifically, there were a couple of questions, Darcy, about the plan for existing coal-fired plants, as they're decommissioned. I'm not sure if this is something that is in your area. I know Doug's no longer here, but is there anything you can share about that right now?
Yeah, not too much from my perspective. I know there are plans for decommissioning facilities. Like we won't just be abandoning them. Everything will have to be decommissioned one way or another. And even for an SMR development project, you think about that infrastructure and you think about how you can leverage it or use it to make the economics work in a better fashion, right? So those things are being considered to a high degree. I don't have much more information than that.
Yeah. So I think there was another question, Darcy, about just how much water is necessary for an SMR compared to a coal plant or one of our existing coal plants, for example? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's very similar to a coal facility. So you've got that steam cycle running the turbine, and that requires a makeup water. So you need kind of a potable supply that you'll demineralize. So you'll have a water treatment plant to make up or add a fresh supply for that steam cycle. And then you need the cooling aspect outside of that. So the cooling is, there's a lot of options out there, and we've implemented a wide range of those options on our existing thermal power plants. So it's we'll be looking to design the optimal cooling technique for an SMR, and we've modeled the project around once through cooling and relying on a water body to reject that heat. I see the question there on staffing.
Yeah.
It's very similar to a coal plant in that regard as well. So you know, a 300 megawatt coal facility is in the range of 120 full-time staff at the facility. Gas is a lot less. SMRs are in the range of the coal facility. Very similar amount of people needed to operate an SMR as it would a coal-fired power plant.
Yeah, and we hear you about the plans for decommissioning. I know Leanne is more than likely going to provide you with some information about plans there. So I think she's typing a response out for you now. Any other questions around construction? Anything? Let's go back here, see if we've missed anything. So far, we've been able to answer 33 questions. Thank you. Thank you for the good questions.
Yeah, some specific questions about certain reservoirs, and you think about,
Right.
like, we know what our coal industry, we know what our impact is of operating X number of megawatts from a coal facility at Boundary Dam. And so you compare that to what the needs might be for an SMR facility, and we have a really good understanding there, I think. But every water body has a different ability to reject heat, and it's dependent on the surface area to depth and total volume type of thing. So, you can use Boundary Dam as maybe a baseline and compare Rafferty or any other dam, right? Like Morrison at Poplar River or some of the bigger facilities. You can get an idea of what their capacity is going to be and what the impact will be of rejecting that heat through that water body. So that you'll have increased losses to evaporation, and the water body will heat up a bit because that temperature coming out of the power plant is hotter. So those have an effect on the water resource and the habitat there, and a lot of work to really understand that and develop it will be part of the siting consideration, and that'll lead right into the impact assessment, of course. So lots of information to come on that. We've kind of got a baseline and some conservative estimates that we can use to make an initial preference around which water bodies are better and which ones aren't as good for nuclear power. And so a lot of work to build that area out, though.
There's a really good question. I think this is the first time I've seen this question. You may have seen it before. If SaskPower was to use SMR facilities, would we see a plant like Estevan, converted into a repair and reclaim facility? I'm thinking about this in terms of very recently, we bought a truck as a parts truck, and I was thinking of comparing that to this situation where there would be people staying to kind of operate replacement of a plant for replacement parts. Is that something that we've thought about?
That's interesting. I saw that one too. It's leveraging the existing infrastructure. So if you were going to develop an SMR in close proximity, we don't think it wouldn't make sense to convert like a Boundary Dam into a nuclear facility. But if you're in the proximity, maybe you can leverage some of that existing infrastructure. So the shop space, the cooling water, the interaction with the water body, the intake and discharge and things like that, you do start to you want to look at that, right? And leverage the existing infrastructure to whatever degree you can. It improves economics and it lessens our impact. If we've already disturbed the area around there, that may be preferred from an environmental impact perspective in terms of a development for a new project. So interesting ideas, and that's the type of stuff we like to hear from, and we'll take that feedback and you consider it and think about it as you develop your project. And as we understand the needs of the SMR facility, leveraging that existing infrastructure could be an opportunity, right?
Oh, Leanne, you're muted.
Of course, I would do that. Apologies. So all the
One
questions I'm
question.
seeing. Is there another one I missed?
No, just there's the one question. I think it's been answered, but just to clear it up for everyone, because I maybe missed saying it. That first site that we're finding and we're licensing will be for about 600 megawatts. So, and Ian mentioned it, I think, too, when he was talking earlier. But we'll be looking to license the first site for 600 megawatts, which would be potentially 2 construction phases that we would separate. And then we would have to find a second site after that, or redo all of the work that goes into the impact assessment and the site licensing process. But by going for a full 600 megawatts at the first site, it lessens the time needed for that second development, the second tranche of 300 megawatts, right? Because you wouldn't have to redo the impact assessment.
There's a question in the chat that maybe
Right.
someone's wondering about time for site prep. When you put up your schedule, we're thinking about once we get the construction license, or once we get the site license, we've got about 6 months of prep and before we start the construction work. And I know you've been giving that a lot of thought and assessment. Maybe you can talk about, I think what he's wondering about is, seems like that's not enough time.
Yeah, I think we have more than that, Ian.
Yeah.
I think we've got about a year plus in the site prep phase, and that a lot of work needs to get done on the construction execution plan for the technology that we're going to build. And so different reactors require different amounts of site prep, and that's one thing that we look at too. So a lot of the reactors end up, a good portion of the reactor is set underground, and so that digging that hole is part of the site prep phase. Building out roads and infrastructure, managing all the vegetation and landscaping of the site, it all goes into that site prep phase. So a lot of work to be done on developing our project and really, putting the detail in and what we're going to be doing day by day for that year or so. And the timeline may get tweaked, and the need for when we get our construction license may get tweaked as we kind of materialize the construction execution plan. But yeah, good question, and a lot of work to do to really understand the execution plan there still.
So I put in the chat a link to our survey that we'd love for you to just tell us how we did today. There's some questions about SMRs in general, and then we'd really like your feedback on the information we shared today. Should take about 5 minutes. We'll send that out to all of you as well separately. I just want to thank everybody for the great questions today. And to Jackie and Kelsey, I turn it over to you guys.
Kelsey, you're muted.
Yeah, got it. Well, thank you guys very much. We, Town of Coronach and RM, we appreciate partnering with Estevan Chamber of Commerce and Jackie and everything you guys did. Thank you to SaskPower and the CNSC for being a part and providing us speakers, and especially to all those of you who joined in today from both communities. Like I said, we're happy to partner with Estevan because we know our communities are in a lot of the same situations. You guys have a lot of the same questions, so it's been great to partner on this. So, and just to go back to what Leanne said, we really hope you guys fill out the surveys and participate in that. So we have the opportunity to get your feedback and take the next steps moving forward. So thank you everyone, and I'll let Jackie say a few words too.
All right, I just want to echo exactly what you said, Kelsey. Thank you so much to everyone on the panel today. Thank you, Kelsey, for partnering with us. CNSC, SaskPower, and all the participants. A lot of brilliant minds on this panel, but also you participants. Lots of really great questions. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. I know we will continue to be in touch with SaskPower. This has been a long, long relationship that we've been building. And so I very much appreciate that and the engagement from SaskPower and also from the participants today. A couple of things, as Leanne said, you should be getting an email from Leanne, from SaskPower, I'm not sure who it's coming from, with the survey feedback. Watch for that. If you do not want to receive that, please let Kathy know at admin@estevanchamber.ca. And we will also be doing a follow-up email from the chamber. We are hoping to get this video up on our YouTube channel. So go check out our YouTube channel. That is new. And there were also, Tarek had a link, and we'll include that as well. They have a session coming up on February 2nd, I think, in English, and 3rd in French, en français, and that is the extent of my French. So thank you very much. This has been a brilliant presentation, and Leanne, you are exactly right. It is pretty much 12 noon, so your notes and your format worked out brilliantly. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop recording, and have a fantastic day.